In the small windswept town of Elmwood, nestled between rolling hills and shadowy forests, Ethan Walker lived a life defined by routine. His days were spent tending the cash register at Hank's Auto Supply, the only job he could find after dropping out of community college a year earlier. Nights, he returned to his drafty one-room apartment above a laundromat, the faint hum of washing machines a constant backdrop to his thoughts. The town itself seemed to mirror Ethan's own struggles, quiet, tired, and weathered by time. The main street was lined with faded storefronts and flickering neon signs that no longer shone as brightly as they once had. The sidewalks were often empty, save for the occasional stray cat or an elderly couple strolling to the diner at the corner. Ethan's apartment was sparsely furnished, a second-hand couch, a rickety table, and a mattress on the floor. The walls were yellowed from years of neglect, and the lone window offered a view of the laundromat's roof, littered with rusted vents and discarded soda cans. Each evening, Ethan sat on his couch, staring at a faded photo of his late father, an old mechanic who once owned a thriving garage before the economy soured and debts piled up. Ethan had idolized his father, a man known for his steady hands and even steadier heart, but now he felt like a far cry from that legacy. He carried the weight of regret for the things he'd failed to do, finishing school, helping his mom keep the family home, or even just living up to his father's name. It was a cold Thursday evening in late November when everything began to change. Ethan was walking home from work, the wind biting through his thin jacket, when he heard a harsh screech, followed by a loud thud. Across the street, an old blue pickup truck had stalled in the middle of the intersection. Smoke rose from its hood, and the driver, a wiry, silver-haired man, was struggling to push it off the road. Ethan hesitated, his breath fogging in the icy air. He considered walking past. He was tired, his feet hurt, and the warmth of his apartment was calling to him. But something about the man, perhaps the way he seemed so determined despite his frail frame, struck a chord. Before he could overthink, Ethan crossed the street. "Need a hand?" he called. The man looked up, his face lined with age and worry. "Sure could use one," he said, his voice raspy but kind. "This old girl's given up on me." Together, they managed to push the truck onto the shoulder of the road. Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans, glancing at the steaming engine. "What happened?" "Engine overheated," the man said, sighing. "Haven't had the time, or money, to get her looked at." Ethan nodded, then asked, "You live around here?" The man shook his head. "Just passing through. Name's Walter Beckett, by the way. And you?" "Ethan Walker." "Well, Ethan Walker, you've got a good heart," Walter said, smiling faintly. "Not everyone stops to help these days." Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's nothing. You need me to call someone?" Walter shook his head again. "No service out here, and I don't want to bother anyone this late." After a moment's thought, Ethan said, "I know a bit about engines. My dad was a mechanic. Mind if I take a look?" Walter hesitated, then nodded. "Be my guest." Ethan spent the next half hour tinkering under the hood, his hands freezing but steady as he worked. Eventually, he managed to get the engine running, though it sputtered and groaned like an old man waking from a nap. Walter's gratitude was palpable. "You saved me tonight, kid," he said. "Let me pay you for your trouble." Ethan shook his head. "Don't worry about it." "Then at least let me buy you dinner sometime," Walter insisted. Ethan smiled faintly, but made no promises. "Just take care of yourself, okay?" The two parted ways, and Ethan returned to his apartment, feeling a small but unfamiliar sense of pride. For once, he'd been able to fix something, even if it was just an old truck. Buffer ho! For the next morning, Ethan was running late for work. As he sprinted down Main Street, he spotted a sleek black car parked in front of Hank's Auto Supply, a sight that stood out amidst the usual beat-up pickups and sedans. He barely had time to wonder who it belonged to before he rushed inside. The day passed in its usual haze of customers and paperwork, but as Ethan prepared to clock out, Hank called him into his office. "There's someone here to see you," Hank said, nodding toward the storefront. Confused, Ethan stepped out to find Walter Beckett standing by the counter, looking decidedly out of place in the humble store. "Walter?" Ethan asked, surprised. Walter grinned. "Thought I'd drop by to see my favorite mechanic." Ethan chuckled awkwardly. "I'm not a mechanic." "Not yet," Walter said, his eyes twinkling, "but I've got a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" Walter's grin widened. "I own a chain of auto repair shops, and I'm always on the lookout for young talent. I saw how you worked on that truck, and I think you've got potential. How'd you feel about a real job, and maybe some training to go with it?" Ethan stared at him, stunned. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Walter said, "but only if you're willing to work hard." Ethan's mind raced. It felt too good to be true, like one of those stories you hear about but never believe could happen to you. But there was something about Walter's sincerity that made him want to believe. "Okay," Ethan said finally, his voice steady. "I'm in." Ethan's first day at Beckett Automotive Solutions began with a sunrise over Elmwood, the kind of warm, golden light that seemed at odds with the biting winter chill. He stood outside the main garage on the outskirts of town, a sprawling facility surrounded by neatly parked cars. The building was modern, a stark contrast to the run-down auto supply store where he'd spent the past year. Walter Beckett greeted him at the entrance, bundled in a thick coat, his expression friendly but businesslike. "You ready for this, Ethan?" Ethan nodded, though his nerves were taut. "I think so." "Good." Walter clapped him on the shoulder. "Let's get you started." Inside, the garage was bustling with activity. Mechanics worked on vehicles of all makes and models, their hands flying with practiced ease. Tools clinked, engines roared, and the air smelled of motor oil and coolant. Ethan felt small in the midst of it all, but there was a spark of excitement in his chest, a sense that this was where he was meant to be. Walter led him to a corner of the garage, where a stocky man with a grease-streaked face was leaning over an engine. "Ethan, this is Mike Daniels, one of our lead mechanics. He'll be your mentor for the next few weeks." Mike straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, and gave Ethan a quick once-over. "You're the kid who fixed Walter's truck?" "Yeah," Ethan said, feeling self-conscious. Mike smirked. "Let's see if you can do it again. Grab a wrench." For the next few hours, Ethan worked under Mike's watchful eye, tackling small tasks, checking oil levels, replacing a battery, and inspecting brake pads. Mike was a tough but patient teacher, correcting Ethan's grip on a ratchet or showing him how to align a tire with a precision that bordered on obsessive. By lunch, Ethan's hands were filthy and his back ached, but there was a deep satisfaction in the work. He sat on a bench outside the garage, eating a sandwich Walter had bought for him. "Not bad for your first day," Walter said, sitting beside him with a steaming cup of coffee. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Ethan admitted. "But good, like I'm actually doing something that matters." Walter nodded. "That's the thing about this kind of work. It's honest. You see the results of your effort right in front of you." Ethan looked down at his hands, the grease staining his palms and under his nails. It reminded him of his father, who used to come home with the same marks after a long day in the garage. For the first time, Ethan felt a connection to that memory, a sense that maybe he wasn't so far from living up to his father's legacy after all. Over the next week, Ethan's routine shifted. Mornings were spent at the garage, learning everything from basic maintenance to more complex diagnostics. Evenings were still spent at Hank's Auto Supply, as he couldn't afford to quit just yet. The long hours left him exhausted, but the progress he made at Beckett Automotive gave him a newfound sense of purpose. Mike's tough love approach pushed Ethan to improve quickly. There were moments of frustration, bolts that wouldn't budge, engines that refused to cooperate. But Mike was always there with a gruff word of encouragement or a quick demonstration of what Ethan was doing wrong. "You've got the instincts," Mike said one afternoon as Ethan successfully replaced a timing belt on an old sedan. "Now you just need the experience. That takes time." Ethan nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'll get there." One cold Friday evening, as Ethan was locking up Hank's Auto Supply, he noticed a familiar figure standing by the entrance. A boy no older than 10, wearing a tattered jacket and clutching a torn backpack. "You okay, kid?" Ethan asked, stepping outside. The boy hesitated, his eyes darting nervously. "My bike's broken," he said finally, pointing to the rusted frame lying on the ground nearby. "Chain came off." Ethan crouched beside the bike, inspecting the chain. "I can fix this," he said. "Give me a second." It took only a few minutes to get the chain back in place, but the boy's face lit up, as if Ethan had performed a miracle. "Thanks," the boy said, climbing onto the bike. "You didn't have to help." Ethan smiled faintly. "It's no big deal." As the boy pedaled away into the night, Ethan felt a flicker of warmth in his chest, a reminder of why he'd stopped to help Walter Beckett that night in the intersection. Small acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways you didn't expect. The following Monday, Walter called Ethan into his office. The space was modest, with a desk cluttered with papers and a bulletin board covered in photos of vintage cars. "Sit down, Ethan," Walter said, gesturing to a chair. Ethan obeyed, unsure of what to expect. "Is something wrong?" Walter shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Quite the opposite. I've been keeping an eye on you these past couple of weeks. You've got potential, Ethan. Real potential. And I want to help you take it further." "How?" Ethan asked, his brow furrowing. "I've spoken to a friend who runs a technical school in the city," Walter said. "They've got a program for automotive technology, one of the best in the state. I'd like to sponsor you." Ethan blinked, stunned. "You mean, pay for me to go?" "That's right, but it's not charity," Walter said firmly. "It's an investment. I see something in you, Ethan, and I think you've got what it takes to make something of yourself. All I ask is that you keep working hard." Ethan sat back, his mind racing. The idea of going back to school, of learning properly, of building a future, was both thrilling and terrifying. He thought of his father, of the life he'd always dreamed of, but never thought was within reach. Finally, he looked up at Walter. "I won't let you down." Walter's smile widened. "I know you won't." Ethan had never thought he'd set foot in a classroom again. Yet here he was, standing in front of the towering brick building of Grant City Technical Institute, his breath visible in the frosty morning air. His acceptance letter and schedule were clutched tightly in one hand, his nerves humming with equal parts excitement and anxiety. "Day one," he muttered to himself. "Here goes nothing." Inside, the building buzzed with activity. Students of all ages shuffled through the halls, their conversations blending into a low hum. Posters advertising workshops, job fairs, and study groups lined the walls. Ethan felt out of place among the neatly dressed students with backpacks that didn't have duct tape holding the straps together. He checked his schedule. Introduction to Automotive Systems, Room 104. Navigating the maze of hallways, he finally found the room, its door slightly ajar. Peeking inside, he saw rows of desks and a towering whiteboard covered in diagrams of engines and transmissions. Ethan hesitated before stepping in, feeling the weight of imposter syndrome pressing down on him. "What am I even doing here?" he thought. But then he remembered Walter's unwavering belief in him. That belief was like a lifeline, pulling him forward. The instructor, Professor Clayton, was a wiry man in his late 50s with sharp eyes and a gruff voice. "Welcome to Automotive Systems," he said, as the students settled into their seats. "If you think this is going to be easy, you're in the wrong place. We're here to turn you into problem solvers, not part swappers." Ethan scribbled notes furiously as Professor Clayton dove into the basics of internal combustion engines. Terms like compression ratio, cylinder block, and valve timing filled the air, making Ethan's head spin. By the end of the 2-hour lecture, his notebook was a chaotic mess of diagrams and bullet points, and his brain felt like it had been put through a wringer. He stayed after class, waiting until the other students had filed out before approaching Professor Clayton. "Sir," Ethan began, hesitating, "I'm new to this, and I want to make sure I don't fall behind." Clayton raised an eyebrow. "You're already ahead of the curve by admitting you don't know everything. Stick with it, and you'll be fine." Ethan nodded, a small but steadying reassurance settling over him. Late nights and early lessons. Balancing school, work, and life proved to be a grueling challenge. Mornings were spent in class, afternoons at Beckett Automotive, and evenings at Hank's Auto Supply. Ethan often didn't return to his apartment until well past midnight, only to wake up a few hours later and do it all over again. There were nights when exhaustion nearly got the better of him. He'd stare at his textbooks, the words blurring on the page, wondering if he'd made a mistake by taking on so much. But every time doubt crept in, he thought of his mom still working double shifts at the diner, of Walter's faith in him, and of his father's grease-stained hands. Those thoughts fueled him, pushing him to keep going. One evening, Ethan found himself in the garage at Beckett Automotive, tasked with shadowing Mike on a transmission replacement. The work was meticulous, requiring precision and patience, two things Ethan was still developing. "You're rushing," Mike said as Ethan struggled to align the transmission casing. "Take a breath. Force won't get you anywhere with these parts." Ethan exhaled, his hands trembling slightly as he tried again. This time, the casing slid into place with a satisfying click. "There you go," Mike said, nodding approvingly. "You've got good instincts, but you need to trust yourself more. That'll come with time." As the night wore on, Ethan's confidence grew. He began to see the patterns in the work, the logic behind the systems. It wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about understanding them. 2 weeks into his program, Ethan was in the middle of a lab exercise when he overheard a fellow student, Maya Rodriguez, arguing with the instructor. Maya was one of the sharpest students in the class, but today she seemed flustered. "I can't afford the tools," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "How am I supposed to complete the project without them?" Professor Clayton frowned but offered no immediate solution. "You'll have to figure it out, Rodriguez. That's part of the challenge." Ethan hesitated, then made a decision. After class, he caught up with Maya in the hallway. "Hey," he said, jogging to match her brisk pace, "I've got an extra set of tools you can borrow." Maya stopped, eyeing him warily. "Why would you do that?" Ethan shrugged. "Because I've been there, and someone once helped me when I needed it." Maya studied him for a moment before nodding. "Thanks, Ethan. I owe you one." "It's nothing," Ethan replied, but the gratitude in her eyes made him feel like it was something. The achieved signs of progress. By mid-semester, Ethan began to find his rhythm. His grades improved, and he started volunteering for extra shifts at the garage, eager to apply what he was learning in class. Mike noticed the change. "You're picking things up faster," Mike said one afternoon, as Ethan successfully diagnosed an engine misfire. "Keep this up, and you'll be running your own bay in no time." The compliment filled Ethan with a quiet pride. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. One Friday evening, Ethan visited his mom at the diner. She was wiping down tables, her apron stained with coffee and grease. "How's school?" she asked, her tone guarded but curious. "It's good," Ethan said, sitting at the counter. "Hard, but good." Sarah paused, looking at him closely. You seem different. Ethan smiled faintly. I guess I feel different, like I'm finally doing something that matters. His mom's expression softened, and she reached out to squeeze his hand. I'm proud of you, Ethan. I don't say it enough, but I am. Those words stayed with Ethan long after he left the diner, a reminder of how far he'd come and how much further he still wanted to go. Closing scene. That night, as Ethan sat at his desk reviewing notes for an upcoming exam, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Walter. Keep pushing, kid. The best is yet to come. Ethan smiled, the words resonating deeply. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that Walter was right, that his hard work, struggles, and sacrifices might actually lead to something extraordinary. He turned back to his notes, determination settling into his bones. Whatever came next, he was ready for it. The morning air was crisp as Ethan unlocked the door to Beckett Automotive Solutions, arriving earlier than usual. He wanted to get a head start on a diagnostic project Mike had mentioned the day before, a high-end SUV with a complex electrical issue that had stumped some of the other mechanics. Ethan saw it as both a challenge and an opportunity to prove himself. Inside, the garage was quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of a vending machine and the faint creak of the metal doors as they settled in the cold. Ethan flipped on the lights, the fluorescent bulbs flickering before bathing the room in a steady, sterile glow. He pulled on his coveralls, grabbed his toolbox, and headed to the bay where the SUV awaited. The diagnostic process was painstaking. Ethan traced wires, checked connections, and ran tests on the vehicle's intricate network of sensors. Hours passed, and frustration began to creep in as he struggled to pinpoint the source of the problem. "Come on," he muttered, his hands covered in grease and his brow furrowed in concentration. "What am I missing?" Just as he was about to call it quits, Mike arrived, his sharp eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "Still at it?" he asked, setting down his coffee. Ethan nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "I can't figure out why the sensors aren't communicating with the ECU. Everything looks fine on paper." Mike walked over, inspecting Ethan's work. After a few moments, he pointed to a wire tucked beneath the dashboard. "You checked that ground connection?" Ethan froze. "No, I didn't think it would affect everything," Mike finished for him. "Always start with the basics. 9 times out of 10, it's something simple." Ethan fixed the connection, and sure enough, the system sprang to life. The SUV's dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, and the error codes disappeared. Relief and pride flooded Ethan as he turned to Mike. "Thanks," Ethan said, grinning. "I owe you one," Mike smirked. "Just doing my job. But you're getting there, kid. Keep at it." Things seemed to be falling into place, but life, as Ethan was learning, rarely stayed smooth for long. At the end of the week, he received a call from Hank, his boss at the auto supply store. "Ethan," Hank said, his voice heavy, "I hate to do this, but I've got to let you go. Business has been slow, and I can't afford to keep extra staff." Ethan gripped the phone tightly, his chest tightening. "I understand, Hank. Thanks for giving me a chance while you could." The loss of income hit hard. Ethan's tuition and tools were covered thanks to Walter's sponsorship, but rent and living expenses were still on his shoulders. His mom's small paycheck from the diner couldn't stretch far enough to cover both of them. That night, Ethan sat at the small kitchen table in their apartment, staring at a pile of bills. Sarah walked in, her face lined with exhaustion. "I can pick up more shifts," she offered, but Ethan shook his head. "No, Mom, you're already doing too much. I'll figure something out." He didn't know how, but he meant it. A helping hand. The next day, Ethan approached Walter during his lunch break at the garage. Walter was sitting in his office, poring over spreadsheets, when Ethan knocked on the door. "Got a minute?" Ethan asked, stepping inside. Of course. What's on your mind? Walter leaned back, giving Ethan his full attention. I lost my job at Hank's, Ethan admitted, his voice tight. I was wondering if there's any way I could pick up more hours here, even if it's just cleaning or running errands. Walter studied him for a moment, then smiled. You didn't have to ask. I was going to offer you something anyway. I've been meaning to put someone in charge of inventory, making sure we have the right parts in stock, logging shipments, that kind of thing. Interested? Relief and gratitude washed over Ethan. Absolutely. Thank you, Walter. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Walter said, clapping him on the shoulder. You're part of the team now, Ethan, and we take care of our own. New connections. As Ethan's hours at the garage increased, so did his responsibilities. One afternoon, while organizing the inventory, he ran into Maya Rodriguez, his classmate from the technical school. She was standing by the counter, talking to Mike about her internship application. Didn't know you worked here, Maya said when she spotted Ethan. Started a few weeks ago, Ethan replied, setting down a box of brake pads. What about you? Just applying for an internship, Maya said. Figured I'd try here since it's the best shop in town. Mike raised an eyebrow. You're sharp and you know your stuff. I'll put in a word with Walter. Maya smiled. Thanks, Mike. After she left, Mike turned to Ethan. You two know each other? Yeah, we're in the same program, Ethan said. She's good, better than me, honestly. Mike chuckled. Don't sell yourself short, kid. You're both going places. Setbacks and determination. By the end of the month, Ethan was juggling classes, work, and home life with a precision he didn't know he was capable of. But the pressure took its toll. One evening, while repairing a customer's car, Ethan made a mistake, forgetting to properly torque the lug nuts on a wheel. The oversight caused the wheel to wobble during a test drive, and Mike caught it before any damage was done. What were you thinking? Mike barked, his tone harsher than usual. You could have caused an accident. Ethan's face burned with shame. I'm sorry. I just wasn't paying attention. That's the problem, Mike said, his voice softening slightly. This work isn't forgiving, Ethan. You can't afford to get sloppy. Ethan nodded, the weight of the mistake settling heavily on him. He stayed late that night, double-checking his work and resolving to never let his focus slip again. Doody Cedar, a glimpse of the future. As winter gave way to spring, Ethan's skills continued to grow. One Saturday, Walter called him into the office. There's a conference coming up in the city, Walter said. It's for auto professionals, new tech, training sessions, the works. I want you to go. Ethan blinked in surprise. Me? Are you sure? Absolutely. You've earned it, Walter said. Consider it an investment in your future. Ethan hesitated, but then nodded. Thank you. I won't waste the opportunity. That night, as Ethan sat in his apartment, staring out the window at the flickering lights of Elmwood, he felt a sense of quiet hope. Life wasn't perfect, far from it, but for the first time, he believed he was building something lasting, something real. The road ahead was still long, but he was ready to face it. The city skyline loomed ahead as Ethan rode shotgun in Walter's sleek sedan, the hum of the engine filling the quiet between them. It was Ethan's first trip outside Elmwood in years, and the sight of towering buildings and endless streams of traffic was both exhilarating and intimidating. Walter glanced at him, a faint smile playing on his lips. Nervous? Ethan shifted in his seat. A little. I've never been to anything like this before. Well, you'll fit in just fine, Walter assured him. This conference isn't just for seasoned professionals, it's for people with potential, like you. They pulled into the parking lot of a sprawling convention center, its glass facade reflecting the late morning sun. Ethan stepped out of the car, clutching his backpack tightly, and followed Walter inside. The air buzzed with energy as attendees milled about, dressed in everything from tailored suits to grease-stained coveralls. Booths displaying the latest automotive technology lined the massive exhibition hall, with interactive demonstrations and gleaming car parts on display. Walter handed Ethan a badge with his name printed neatly across the top. "This is your ticket to everything," he said. "Take your time, explore, and don't be afraid to ask questions. You'll learn more here in a day than in a week of classes." Ethan nodded, his nerves giving way to curiosity as he wandered into the crowd. New Frontiers. Ethan's first stop was a booth showcasing advanced diagnostic tools. A representative demonstrated a handheld device that could identify issues with a car's electrical system in seconds. Ethan asked question after question, absorbing every detail. "You've got a good eye for this," the rep said, handing Ethan a brochure. "If you're ever interested in field testing new tech, let us know." Encouraged, Ethan moved on, stopping at a stall showcasing electric vehicle (EV) technology. A sleek electric sedan sat on a rotating platform, its hood open to reveal an intricate network of batteries and wiring. A young engineer explained the challenges of maintaining EVs, from battery cooling systems to regenerative braking. "Do you think this is where the industry's headed?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. "Without a doubt," the engineer replied. "And the mechanics who learn this technology now will be ahead of the curve when EVs become the norm." Ethan filed the information away, realizing how much the industry was evolving and how much he still had to learn. An unexpected encounter. Later in the afternoon, Ethan joined Walter for a panel discussion, featuring leaders in the automotive industry. The room was packed, and the stage was lit brightly as a moderator introduced the panelists, one of whom was Peter Caldwell, the owner of a major automotive service network. Walter leaned over and whispered, "That's the man I told you about. Pay attention, he knows his stuff." As the panelists discussed innovations in diagnostics and repair, Peter shared a story about starting as a mechanic in a small-town garage before building his empire. His words struck a chord with Ethan, who couldn't help but feel a kinship with the man's journey. After the panel, Walter approached Peter, introducing Ethan. Peter shook Ethan's hand firmly, his smile warm. "Walter's been singing your praises, says you're a quick learner." "I'm trying to be," Ethan said, his nerves returning under the weight of Peter's gaze. Peter chuckled. "Keep at it. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. If you ever want to see how a large operation runs, reach out to me. We're always looking for young talent." Ethan thanked him, his mind racing, as Peter handed him a business card. It felt like a small door opening, one he hadn't even known existed. Done back to the grind. The days after the conference were a whirlwind. Inspired by what he'd seen, Ethan threw himself into his classes and work with renewed determination. He started staying late at the garage, experimenting with what he'd learned about EV systems and modern diagnostics. Mike noticed the change. "Someone lit a fire under you," Mike said one evening as Ethan worked on a hybrid sedan. Ethan grinned. "The conference opened my eyes. There's so much out there, and I don't want to fall behind." Mike nodded. "Good. But don't forget the basics. All the tech in the world won't save you if you can't tell a good engine from a bad one." The balance between innovation and fundamentals became Ethan's new mantra. He started tutoring classmates who struggled with engine repair while absorbing everything he could about EV systems. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. A setback. Just as things seemed to be going smoothly, life threw Ethan another curveball. One Friday evening, while balancing a car on the lift, he misjudged its weight distribution. The car tilted dangerously before Mike caught it and adjusted the lift in time. "Ethan!" Mike snapped, his face pale. "That could have gone sideways real fast. What were you thinking?" Ethan's face burned with shame. "I'm sorry. I wasn't paying attention." "This isn't just about you," Mike said, his tone softer but firm. "If that car had fallen, Someone could have gotten hurt. You can't rush this stuff. The mistake rattled Ethan. For the next few days, he second-guessed himself, afraid of making another error. But instead of pulling away, he pushed harder, reviewing safety protocols and practicing on equipment during his off hours. The incident became a turning point, teaching him the value of focus and accountability. Recognition. A month later, Ethan's hard work paid off. During a team meeting, Walter announced the dealership's Employee of the Month, Ethan. Ethan's been with us for only a short time, but his dedication and willingness to learn have made a big impact, Walter said, presenting him with a certificate and a small bonus check. The applause from his co-workers warmed Ethan's chest, but it was Mike's quiet nod of approval that meant the most. Promise to keep one. Evening, Ethan returned home to find his mom sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The bills were stacked neatly beside her, and for the first time in years, there was no overdue notice on top. "You've been working so hard," Sarah said, her voice soft. "I'm proud of you, Ethan." "Thanks, Mom," Ethan replied, sitting across from her. "I just want to make things better for us." "You already have," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "Your dad would be so proud." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Finally he said, "I'm going to keep pushing, for both of us." Sarah smiled, and in that moment, Ethan felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. Ethan's days began to blur into a steady rhythm. Mornings at school, afternoons at the garage, and late nights spent poring over his textbooks. The grind was exhausting, but every step forward felt like a small victory. Still, as spring arrived in Elmwood, life had a way of reminding Ethan that progress was rarely a straight line. One evening, after closing up the garage, Ethan found a letter waiting on the kitchen table of their apartment. His mom, Sarah, was sitting across from it, her face pale. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, dropping his backpack and stepping closer. Sarah pushed the envelope toward him. "It's from the bank." Ethan's stomach sank as he opened the letter. The contents confirmed his worst fears. The bank was foreclosing on the small house where his father's garage had once stood. It had been abandoned for years, too costly for them to maintain after his father's death. But knowing it was being taken away for good hit Ethan harder than he expected. "We can't fight this," Sarah said softly. "I've tried everything." Ethan's hands tightened around the letter. Memories of his father working late in that garage flooded back, the smell of motor oil, the hum of the radio, and his dad's steady voice guiding him through his first attempts at fixing an engine. Losing the house felt like losing a piece of his father all over again. "I'll figure something out," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We can't just let it go." Sarah's eyes were weary. "Ethan, sometimes you have to let go of the past to move forward." But Ethan couldn't accept that. Not yet. A risky plan. The next day, Ethan approached Walter in his office. The older man looked up from his desk, his brow furrowing as he noticed Ethan's tense expression. "What's on your mind, kid?" Walter asked. Ethan hesitated before speaking. "Do you know anyone who might be interested in buying an old garage? It's not in great shape, but it has potential." Walter leaned back in his chair, considering Ethan's words. "You're talking about your dad's old place, aren't you?" Ethan nodded. "The bank's taking it, but if I can sell it first, maybe I can at least pay off some of the debt." Walter rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I might know someone." "But Ethan, are you sure this is the right move? That garage is a part of your family's history." "It's not the building that matters," Ethan said, his voice steady. "It's what my dad taught me. That's what I'll carry forward." Walter smiled faintly. "Well said. Let me make a few calls." The offer. A week later, Walter introduced Ethan to Margaret Hayes, a local entrepreneur who specialized in renovating old properties. Margaret was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with a knack for spotting potential where others saw ruin. "I've driven past that garage 100 times," Margaret said as they sat in the dealership's office. "It's got character, but it's going to need a lot of work." "I know," Ethan admitted, "but it's in a good location, and it could be something great again with the right investment." Margaret studied him for a long moment before nodding. "I'll take a look. If it's worth saving, I'll make you an offer." True to her word, Margaret inspected the property and, after some negotiation, agreed to purchase it for enough to cover most of the outstanding debt. The deal was finalized within weeks, and while the transaction was bittersweet, Ethan felt a sense of relief. He'd turned a loss into an opportunity, something his father would have approved of. Isorandarm nor a new focus. With the financial burden eased, Ethan threw himself even deeper into his work. At Grant City Technical Institute, he began assisting classmates who struggled with complex repairs, earning respect from both his peers and instructors. His natural leadership skills emerged, though he was still reluctant to see himself that way. "You're turning into one of our best students," Professor Clayton said one afternoon after class. "Have you thought about what comes next?" Ethan hesitated. "I want to work in the field, maybe manage a shop one day. But honestly, I'm still figuring it out." Clayton smiled. "That's normal. Just keep learning, and the path will reveal itself." A growing bond. At the garage, Ethan found himself working more often with Maya Rodriguez, who had secured the internship Walter promised. Maya's sharp mind and quick wit made her an excellent partner, and the two developed an easy camaraderie. One afternoon, while they were replacing the brake system on a truck, Maya glanced at Ethan. "You're a lot better at this than when we started school." Ethan grinned. "Thanks, you're not so bad yourself." She laughed, wiping grease from her hands. "So what's the big plan? You gonna stay in Elmwood forever?" Ethan paused, considering her question. "I don't know. There's a lot I want to do, but I feel like this is where I need to be right now." Maya nodded. "Makes sense. Just don't forget, there's a whole world out there waiting for us." An unexpected challenge. One Friday, just as the garage was closing, a customer came in with an urgent problem. His car, a rare vintage sports coupe, had broken down on the highway, and he needed it fixed by Monday for a collector's event. Walter and Mike were both busy, so the job fell to Ethan and Maya. The car's engine was a maze of unfamiliar components, and the repair demanded precision. They worked late into the night, poring over manuals and consulting online forums for guidance. "Think we'll finish in time?" Maya asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "We don't have a choice," Ethan said, his determination unwavering. By Sunday evening, they'd done it. The engine purred to life, and the customer's gratitude was palpable. "You two just earned yourselves a reputation," Walter said the next day, his pride evident. "A word of this is going to spread." A step forward. The success of the repair marked a turning point for Ethan. Walter began trusting him with more responsibility, and even Mike started to treat him as an equal, rather than a student. At school, Ethan's instructors recommended him for an advanced apprenticeship program, and he eagerly applied. The apprenticeship came with a stipend that eased his financial strain, allowing him to focus fully on his future. With the foreclosure behind him and his career gaining momentum, Ethan felt like he was finally finding his place in the world. Closing scene one evening, Ethan stood outside the dealership, staring up at the stars. The air was cool, and the faint hum of traffic in the distance reminded him of how much his life had changed in just a few short months. Walter walked up beside him, hands in his coat pockets. "What's next for you, Ethan?" Ethan smiled, the answer finally clear in his mind. "Whatever it is, I'm ready." Walter nodded, his expression proud. "I believe you." The apprenticeship program turned out to be more challenging than Ethan anticipated, but in all the right ways. He found himself working alongside seasoned professionals at one of the most advanced auto shops in the region. The facility was a far cry from the modest garage at Beckett Automotive Solutions. Rows of pristine bays equipped with state-of-the-art diagnostic tools and high-performance vehicles that Ethan had only dreamed of working on. His new mentor, Rebecca Sharp, was known for her no-nonsense attitude and near-legendary reputation in the industry. Rebecca was in her early 40s, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing and a voice that commanded attention. "You'll need to prove you belong here," Rebecca said during Ethan's first day. "You're green, but you're here because someone thinks you've got potential. Don't waste it." "I won't," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the nerves twisting in his stomach. "Good. Now grab a torquey wrench. Let's see if you can back up that confidence." The learning curve. Under Rebecca's guidance, Ethan's understanding of complex automotive systems deepened. She challenged him daily, throwing problems at him that required both technical skill and creative thinking. One afternoon, they were tasked with repairing a high-end electric SUV that had been towed in with a powertrain issue. Rebecca handed Ethan the schematic for the vehicle's electrical system and crossed her arms. "You've studied this kind of thing before, right?" "Yeah," Ethan said, though the maze of wires and modules made his head spin. "Then show me what you've got." Ethan spent hours tracing circuits, testing connections, and narrowing down potential faults. Each time he thought he'd found the issue, Rebecca pushed him to dig deeper. Finally, he identified a faulty inverter that was throwing off the entire system. Rebecca gave a rare smile. "Not bad, Walker. Not bad at all." The success gave Ethan a boost of confidence, but it also taught him that there was still so much to learn. Every mistake became a stepping stone, every success a reminder that he was capable of more than he'd imagined. The new test. As Ethan settled into the apprenticeship, he found himself facing a new challenge outside of work. Maya Rodriguez, his closest friend and frequent partner at Beckett Automotive, called him one evening with a note of worry in her voice. "I need your help, Ethan," she said. "My little brother's been skipping school, and I don't know what to do." Ethan hesitated. "Why me?" "Because he looks up to you," Maya admitted. "You've been where he is, lost, unsure of yourself. Maybe you can talk some sense into him." Ethan agreed, though the thought of mentoring someone younger felt foreign to him. That weekend, he met Carlos, Maya's 12-year-old brother, at their family's small home on the edge of town. Carlos was a wiry kid, with sharp eyes and an air of defiance. "You're the guy Maya's always talking about?" Carlos asked, folding his arms. "What makes you so special?" "I'm not special," Ethan replied, "but I've been where you are, and trust me, skipping school doesn't get you anywhere you want to be." Carlos rolled his eyes, but Ethan didn't give up. Over the next few weeks, he spent time with Carlos, showing him the basics of car repair and sharing stories about his own struggles. Slowly, the boy's walls began to crumble. "Maybe school's not so bad," Carlos admitted one afternoon as they tinkered with an old bike. "I just don't want to end up stuck." "You won't be stuck," Ethan said firmly, "but you have to work for what you want. It's not easy, but it's worth it." An unexpected offer. Ethan's dedication at the apprenticeship didn't go unnoticed. One day, Rebecca called him into her office, a rare occurrence that immediately set Ethan on edge. "I've been watching your progress," Rebecca said, leaning back in her chair, "and I think you're ready for something bigger." Ethan frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" "There's an industry-wide competition coming up," Rebecca explained. "The National Automotive Excellence Challenge. It's a chance to showcase your skills on a national stage and network with some of the biggest names in the business." Ethan's heart raced. "You think I could compete in something like that?" "I know you can," Rebecca said. "But it's going to take hard work. The other competitors won't go easy on you, and the challenges are grueling. Are you in?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." Preparation training for the competition consumed Ethan's life over the next 2 months. Rebecca drilled him on everything from precision repairs to time-sensitive diagnostics. The pressure was intense, but Ethan thrived under it, determined to prove himself. At the same time, he continued to balance his responsibilities at Beckett Automotive and his classes at Grant City Technical Institute. It was exhausting, but Ethan found strength in the people around him: Walter, Maya, Rebecca, and even Carlos, who had started attending school regularly and showing an interest in engineering. One night, as Ethan worked late in the shop, Maya stopped by with 2 cups of coffee. "You're going to burn out if you keep this up," she said, handing him a cup. "I can't afford to slow down," Ethan replied, taking a sip. This competition could change everything. Maya studied him for a moment before smiling. "You know, I've never met anyone as stubborn as you, but that's why I know you'll do great." The competition, the day of the National Automotive Excellence Challenge, arrived with a crisp breeze and clear skies. Ethan stood on the competition floor, surrounded by other young mechanics from across the country. The air buzzed with energy as spectators filled the stands, and the judges reviewed their clipboards. The first round tested precision and efficiency. Ethan was tasked with diagnosing and repairing a mid-size sedan's brake system under a tight time limit. He worked methodically, his hands steady as he replaced worn pads and bled the lines. When the timer buzzed, he stepped back, confident in his work. The second round was even tougher, diagnosing an electrical fault in a luxury hybrid. Ethan's nerves flared as the clock ticked down, but he remembered Rebecca's advice: start with the basics. Following the wiring diagram, he pinpointed the issue with seconds to spare. By the final round, only 3 competitors remained. Ethan's challenge was to rebuild a transmission under the watchful eyes of the judges. His hands ached and sweat dripped down his face as he worked, but he refused to give up. When the dust settled, Ethan stood on the podium with a second-place medal around his neck. It wasn't first, but it was enough to cement his place in the industry. Closing scene. Back in Elmwood, Walter threw a small celebration at the garage. Ethan stood among his friends and co-workers, his medal glinting under the overhead lights. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged, not just in the garage, but in the future he was building. Walter raised a toast. To Ethan Walker, proof that hard work, determination, and a little kindness can change everything. As the room filled with cheers, Ethan felt a swell of gratitude and hope. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: he was ready to face them. Ethan Walker stood in front of the old garage, the one his father had built and poured his life into so many years ago. The once crumbling structure had been transformed. Its walls gleamed with fresh paint, the windows were replaced with modern glass panels, and a new sign hung above the entrance: Walker Beckett Auto Solutions. It was opening day, the culmination of years of hard work, unexpected kindness, and relentless determination. Maya stepped up beside him, her expression a mix of pride and excitement. "You ready for this?" she asked, nudging him with her elbow. Ethan smiled, the weight of the moment sinking in. More than ready. The turning point. The journey to this day hadn't been easy. After the National Automotive Excellence Challenge, Ethan's reputation grew and offers began trickling in. Service centers and dealerships across the region expressed interest in hiring him, but Ethan couldn't shake the dream of rebuilding his father's garage. One evening, while cleaning up after a long shift at Beckett Automotive, Ethan shared his idea with Walter. "I want to bring my dad's garage back to life," he said, wiping grease from his hands. "Not just for me, but for this town. Elmwood deserves a place where people can come for honest, quality work." Walter listened quietly, then leaned back in his chair. "It's a big step, Ethan. You've got the skills, no doubt about that, but running a shop? That's a whole new ball game." "I'm willing to learn," Ethan said, his voice steady. Walter smiled, his eyes twinkling with pride. Then let's make it happen. Building the dream. Walter offered to partner with Ethan, providing financial backing and guidance while giving Ethan full control over the day-to-day operations. Maya, now a certified mechanic, jumped at the chance to join the team. Together, they spent months planning, hiring staff, and renovating the space. The process was grueling. Ethan juggled late-night study sessions with business courses at the local community college while overseeing the garage's transformation. Maya and Mike helped train the new hires, and Walter shared his decades of experience, teaching Ethan the ins and outs of running a business. There were setbacks, a delayed shipment of equipment, zoning complications, and even moments of doubt, but each obstacle strengthened Ethan's resolve. For the grand opening. The morning of the grand opening dawned bright and clear. Ethan arrived early, taking a moment to soak in the sight of the revitalized garage. His father's spirit felt alive in the details, the classic car posters on the walls, the toolboxes neatly lined up, and the faint smell of motor oil in the air. The event drew a larger crowd than Ethan had expected. Old friends, new customers, and curious townsfolk gathered to see the revamped garage. Sarah, beaming with pride, stood at the front, chatting with Walter and Rebecca, who had driven in for the occasion. Carlos, now a teenager with a budding interest in engineering, handed out flyers alongside Maya. "Told you this place would be awesome," he said with a grin. "Couldn't have done it without you," Ethan replied, ruffling Carlos's hair. When the ribbon was cut, applause erupted, and the first cars rolled into the bays. Ethan led his team with confidence, ensuring every customer felt welcome and every vehicle was treated with care. A test of strength. A month into the garage's operations, disaster struck. A storm swept through Elmwood, causing flooding that damaged several homes and businesses. Ethan's garage was spared from the worst of it, but the roads were littered with debris, and cars came in with waterlogged engines and damaged electronics. The team worked tirelessly, offering discounted repairs to those affected by the storm. Ethan partnered with local businesses to provide assistance, hosting a fundraiser to support the recovery effort. One evening, as the crew finished a long day of repairs, Maya turned to Ethan. "You're really doing it, you know, making a difference." Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, exhaustion etched on his face. "I just want to pay it forward, like Walter did for me." A full circle moment. A few months later, Ethan received a surprising call. Peter Caldwell, the influential business owner he'd met at the competition, wanted to visit the garage. When Peter arrived, he toured the space with an approving eye. "You've built something incredible here, Ethan," he said, shaking his hand. "Have you thought about expanding?" Ethan hesitated. The idea of franchising the garage felt daunting, but Peter's belief in him was infectious. "Maybe one day," Ethan said. "Right now, I want to focus on this place, making sure it lives up to what my dad started." Peter nodded, respecting the sentiment. "Well, if you ever change your mind, my door's always open." A legacy reborn. As the years passed, Walker Beckett Auto Solutions became a cornerstone of Elmwood. The garage grew steadily, earning a reputation for excellence and community involvement. Ethan mentored young mechanics, including Carlos, who eventually joined the team as an apprentice. Walter retired, but he visited often, proud of the legacy he'd helped nurture. Sarah, finally able to take a step back from her demanding job, found joy in volunteering and spending time with her son. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan stood outside the garage with Maya. The air was warm, the sky streaked with orange and purple. "Hard to believe how far we've come," Ethan said, leaning against the hood of a car. Maya nodded. "And it's just the beginning." Ethan smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The garage wasn't just a business, It was a symbol of everything he'd learned: resilience, kindness, and the power of hope. As the stars began to emerge, Ethan thought of his father, imagining him smiling down with pride. The legacy was alive, not just in the garage, but in the lives it touched every day. And for Ethan Walker, that was more than enough. Epilogue. Years later, a plaque was mounted on the wall of the garage. It read, "In honor of Walter Beckett and Ethan Walker Sr., whose values of integrity and generosity continue to inspire us every day." Beneath it hung a photo of Ethan, Maya, and the team, smiling with the confidence of people who knew they were part of something greater than themselves. The story of Walker Beckett Auto Solutions became a testament to the enduring power of hard work, community, and the belief that even the smallest acts of kindness can spark the greatest transformations.